So guys, I was just looking back at my notes, and here I said never have SCs or FCs. When I was writing that, I had the word simple arguments. I had the plural form of this word in mind, so I said never have. I don't know if any of you guys caught that. I care about little things like that. I don't always notice it. So in my mind, I was thinking simple arguments never have, but just to be consistent with the grammar over here, simple argument never has a subconclusion or never has subconclusions or final conclusions. And here I think it's better to and more clear to say or a final conclusion. Okay. All right, so that said, I want you to practice using, we're going to use all of our notes, so all of these notes, right, that we've been doing over the course of a couple of weeks. We're now into our third week of focusing intensely on arguments. Probably, depends on what semester this is. The point is we have been learning a lot about arguments. And we're going to practice applying these notes as well in addition to our updated notes. So make sure that as we do, that you're using the wording and these definitions, to work through a couple of examples of complex arguments, right? So these notes are a tool that you really want to get used to consulting and using. So we're going to start with our next example of a complex argument. That will be the focus of this video. And then we'll work with our final example for this lesson, a third example, in a separate video. So this is really important. I have to do this lesson on complex arguments because that's what some of you produced. Some of you produced more than one complex argument, so you need this knowledge. Not all of you did. Some of you presented arguments that are just simple arguments. You have no complex arguments. Well, a few of you actually gave me arguments, and all of them are complex arguments. Even if you did not produce any complex arguments, there will be some assignments in the future, at least 2, where you have to look at your peers' response and determine whether they have a simple argument or a complex argument. So, with that said, we are going to apply everything that we have learned about marking up and reformatting an ordinary argument in order to clarify it. So again, this is an ordinary argument per the definition of one of the soft talk modules you completed, and we are going to clarify it. We are going to mark it up as directed in all the notes and as demonstrated. What I recommend you do now is pause the video and reread all of the notes, including the new notes on complex arguments. With that said, I invite you, okay, so let's say you've done that, right? So you've recalled the definition, all that other stuff. I invite you now to pause the video and practice applying what is on page 1 of your handwritten notes about argument analysis. What is that step? That step is to bracket and number all of the statements and only things that are statements in a given argument. So I would like for you to go ahead and do that. Also, I would like for you to take notice of any kind of like typo. Do you notice any sentence fragments or run-ons or anything like that? Spelling. I want you to see if you notice any of that because I'm going to use that as a case in point that will be relevant to some of you. So go ahead and work through this and then return to this video after practicing that so that you can check your how good you've gotten at bracketing and numbering statements and see how you do in recognizing any typos or kind of basic errors. All right, so assuming you have practiced, let's go ahead and work through this. And I'm just going to think out loud as if I were a student. Okay, so I'm dealing with a complex argument. Dr. Carrillo said that a complex argument has at least one conclusion and one final conclusion. Since I'm dealing with an argument, I know that an argument, by definition, is comprised of a set of statements where at least one functions as a premise and there's at least one conclusion. A complex argument, by definition, will have at least 2 conclusions, one being a subconclusion and one being a final conclusion. That subconclusion could occur anywhere in the argument, and the final conclusion could occur anywhere in the argument. I know that it's kind of like the main point and the one towards which all others aim, okay? And so here's an example that she gave us. She said this is just an example. And even though this goes premise, subconclusion, premise, final conclusion, I know, as she has stated here, the subconclusion and final conclusion can occur anywhere in this complex argument. Okay, so That said, let me go ahead and first focus on bracketing and numbering the statements and only statements, because if I don't do that, I might miss a premise, a subconclusion, or a final conclusion. So, is that just your opinion, or are you going with what science says? Well, that's not a statement, so I'm not going to do anything with it. Now, I've got, according to leading researchers of infectious diseases, help to slow down COVID-19. It is my moral opinion that each individual, what? That doesn't make sense. So, guys, I'm going to pretend that I'm a student and I've written this. Okay, what the heck did I do here? According to leading researchers of infectious diseases, help to slow down. Oh, I think I meant to put mask. So I should have said infectious diseases, mask. I think I left out a word there. Mask help to slow down COVID-19. It is my moral opinion that each individual, this is a really long statement, but I'm getting kind of lost here. I think I was trying to say, according to leading researchers of infectious diseases, masks help to slow down COVID-19. Oh, I meant to put a period here. I have a run-on sentence. So I should have a period here because I run on sentences, and then I should have a capital letter for it. So there's actually a statement right here. Once I put in this object and correct the missing word, that's just a typo. And once I change the punctuation, I can clearly see that there is a statement here. So that would be statement 1. I'm supposed to put the number in a circle at the beginning and above the statement. And now that I've seen where I messed up in my basic writing, I know that there's actually 2 statements in this sentence, whereas it looked like there was only 1. So it is my moral opinion that each individual within a given society has a duty to protect the public's health. Okay. Since I'm going to go look at my notes in a minute, because I remember that's an indicator, I think, at least some of the times. Scientists have shown, let me put my bracket here, 3, the effectiveness mask in slowing down the virus. That sounds weird. Scientists have shown the effectiveness mask. I think that's a typo. I forgot to write the word up. The effectiveness of mask in slowing down the virus. Okay, so that would be a statement. I have grounds for, so that would be statement 4, asserting that each individual in society does have a duty to wear a mask. Okay. Consequently, while I respect your freedom to choose, you too have a duty to wear a mask. Okay. So there are 5 statements in here, and I've got all my numbers at the beginning and above each statement line that I have identified. All right, guys. So the reason why we discovered these errors right here, a run-on sentence, an object was left out to make this an intelligible sentence, to make it an actual statement, this little preposition was left out, is because some of you might have minor typos or a sentence fragment, a run-on sentence, or a weird punctuation. You might have a typo, like leaving out a basic word that would otherwise make your syntax good within a statement or sentence. You should and ought to correct any little things that you see like this. You cannot majorly rewrite a sentence. You cannot do that. You cannot change your answer when I ask you to apply all of this stuff to your week 2 arguments. However, you can and are expected to look at your writing and see if you have any kinds of mistakes like this. So again, you can fix typos, you can fix little tiny syntax things without majorly changing your sentence, without rewriting, without changing the content of your answer. 90% of it should still be the same. You can you can add in words that were just tiny words that were missing to make the syntax proper. You can't add a whole bunch of more details to make it better in terms of content. You can fix run-on sentences like I did right here, comma splices, and whatnot. Okay, so now I know, looking at my notes, that I need to I need to identify premises and conclusions, and since this is a complex argument, I know that I am looking for at least one sub-conclusion, and for a conclusion that is the one towards which all others aim. So, according to leading researchers of infectious diseases, masks help to slow down COVID-19. Don't know what that is. Then it says, it is my moral opinion that each individual within a given society has a duty to protect the public's health. Still don't know what that is. But then this says, since scientists have shown the effectiveness of masks in slowing down the virus, so this is a premise for sure, okay? Because I'm looking at my indicator list, and CIS typically functions as a premise indicator. It's not being used to indicate time or sequence as in in the temporal sense. So here a premise, statement 3, is being offered to justify, establish, support statement 4, making it a conclusion. Okay. Now, that's not the end of the argument. They go on after stating this conclusion to say, while I respect your freedom to choose for yourself, you too have a duty to wear a mask. Well, consequently, that sounds like a conclusion indicator. Let me go look at my list of premise and conclusion indicators that I've started for myself. This is typically functioning as a conclusion indicator, and as I use my college level reading skills to look at this and my knowledge of what a complex argument is, what a premise is, what a conclusion is, I really think that this is a conclusion. So I think that 4 and 5 are, that those are statements functioning as a conclusion in this complex argument. I do need to figure out which one is the sub-conclusion. There has to be at least one, and the final conclusion. There can be only one. But I still have not labeled statement 1 and statement 2. So I notice that statement 3 says scientists have shown effectiveness of masks in slowing down the virus. Well, aren't leading researchers of infectious diseases scientists? And this says, according to, so that's basically what? Shown, so they've shown something, the effectiveness of masks in slowing down the virus. So these are really saying basically the same thing. Scientists have shown the effectiveness of masks in slowing down the virus. According to leading researchers of infectious diseases, that a scientist, your mask, what? Helped to slow down the COVID-19. So they've researched it, they've shown it, and slowing down the virus. So these are really both, these are repeating each other. So we're going to have premise. This talks about what kind of researchers, and it uses the formal name of COVID-19. So it's more precise than statement 3. So I'm going to call this one premise repeated. Okay? Now, what about this one? It is my moral opinion that each individual in society has a duty to protect the public's health. It seems like this could be used to support the conclusion. Look at this conclusion. Society has a duty to wear a mask. Here they're talking about their moral opinion that individuals in a society have a duty to wear the mask. They are probably using the sense of duty with respect to individuals to also support one of these conclusions at least. So I'm pretty sure that's a premise. Okay. Now, timeout, guys. So one thing is that once, and as you will see, you're going to do this to your own arguments, but online. You're only going to do it one argument at a time. So the first argument that you're going to mark up is going to be the one about wearing a mask of your own free will. You're not going to mark up all of your arguments at one for a grade, because I want to give you feedback on how well you do marking up, clarifying, and reformatting only one argument. And then you use what you learned based on that attempt for a grade to do better on a future attempt. What you might find is that it's only in reformatting that you're able to make a final determination about which premises are supporting which conclusion. And it's only in reformatting as you type it up that you're able to make a determination about, in not forgetting the context and the cues in the original argument, which conclusion is the final conclusion. So you might think something's a final conclusion up here and something else is a sub-conclusion, but by the time you reformat it, the visual display of the information, given the contextual information in here, helps you to realize that what you thought was a final conclusion in here is really a sub-conclusion, and vice versa. So if you change things down here, the labels for a statement down here, like final conclusion, sub-conclusion, make sure you change it up here and vice versa. Remember, what you do in this part of an argument markup or argument has to align with and be consistent with what is down here and vice versa. Okay, so now look, this says I have grounds for asserting that each individual in society does have a duty. I have grounds for is often used to denote a conclusion, by the way. But notice that they say consequently. In other words, they think statement 5, when they say consequently, follows from statement 4. So statement 4, they're saying, is not only a conclusion that follows from something before it, but it can also be used, is also being used as a premise, right, to advance yet another conclusion, statement 5. So that means that statement 4 is functioning as a conclusion at some point in this argument, and then as a premise at some point in the argument. It just so happens that in this argument, we have a statement that first functions as a conclusion and then as a premise. So what we'll want to do, of course, is label this what? SC, and then we'll label this as what? FC. A huge mistake, you might want to write a warning to yourself or something, or put this on the warnings page, is that sometimes students will not put the FC, and I do not know why. Some students will do that all semester or throughout the semester or at the end of the semester. They'll label a subconclusion, they'll label the final conclusion with the C, but they don't put the F. So remember, you got to pay attention to all of your notes and all of the rules and make sure you're applying everything appropriately. All right, so we're getting there. So notice that when we're working on a complex argument, right, it takes longer to work through a complex argument because we have to do more. There may be more statements, maybe not, because a simple argument can have more statements in this argument, but they just might have a lot more premises, or there could be a lot of irrelevant statements or statements that are merely contextual. All right, so another thing that we have to do is eliminate excess verbiage. It's always important to label your statements before getting rid of excess verbiage. Why? Because you don't want to get rid of any premise or conclusion indicators that can help you identify premise and conclusion. So always do that first. That's content principle 1 of marking up and clarifying arguments in ordinary form. Okay, so then I encourage you to, again, go to your notes, find the page that focuses on content principle 2. What kinds of things does that page of your notes tell you to get rid of? Remember, you don't want to go crazy with eliminating excess verbiage. You have to go back to your notes. This is a tool. Your memory is not perfect. Your memory is faulty and it's insufficient, so you always want to go back to what you have recorded. Plus, you might be tired. You might misremember something. So remember, this page 3 is about eliminating excess verbiage, right? Remember, you have this. Do not get too crazy or extreme when trying to apply the content principle. So I encourage you now to reread through all of this and all of this. I had to go to the back side of my notes. Reread all of that. And then I also encourage you to look at all the examples, right? So anything that's that we have a line through from our simple arguments from previous lessons, those are examples of things that page 2 of your notes refers to. Guys, these are tools. These are artifacts. All of these are artifacts. All of these are tools that I expect you to use when doing all of this for a grade. All right, so now we're going to use our knowledge and review of what counts as excess verbiage, not going too crazy. We're going to use our examples to go ahead and eliminate excess verbiage. We know that we have to draw a line through things that are excess verbiage. Of course, we didn't bracket and number this because it's a question, not a statement, so we draw a line through it. This says, according to leading researchers of infectious diseases, MASC, okay, so there's nothing to get rid of here because we're saying that scientists say that. Some people will want to get rid of according to, because they'll think of it as a premise indicator, and often it is. But what happens if you do that here? It says, leading researchers of infectious diseases, MASC help slow down. That doesn't make any sense, right? You ruin the syntax. So remember, context always matters. While according to typically functions as a premise indicator, in this context, it's an integral part of the syntax of the statement. You get rid of this, and you've destroyed the statement, and it's nonsensical. Okay, then we have, it is my moral opinion. Okay, so it is my moral opinion. We should draw a line through that. You also have to draw a line through that. If you do not get rid of that and you leave it in there, you will create a sentence fragment. Do not create sentence fragments. This is a perfectly good statement so long as you get rid of, so long as you either keep what we've crossed out or drawn a line through, or so long as you draw a line through everything in this excess verbiage through the word that. So this is what is called a what? It's not because they're saying moral, or it's because they're saying what? Opinion. That's a hedge. So remember, hedging is a form of um, excess verbiage. So each individual within a given society has the duty to protect the public's health. All right, so this is functioning as a premise indicator, so we draw a line through it. Now, this is this premise repeated, so we're going to draw a line through it. Scientists have shown the effectiveness of masks in slowing down the virus. I have grounds for asserting that. This is a conclusion indicator phrase. The core of the statement is this. So in previous examples, I would often leave out the premise or conclusion indicator, sometimes excess verbiage, if it was at the beginning of a statement when I bracketed and numbered it. This is a good example of, when I don't. So you can include the premise or conclusion indicator in your bracketing and numbering, but just make sure that you get rid of any premise or conclusion indicators within the bracketing so that you don't create sentence fragments, especially when you include premise indicators in the bracketing. All right, so this is a conclusion indicator, so we're going to get rid of that. Now let's look at this part. While I respect your freedom to choose for yourself, you too have a duty to wear a mask. So this is really what they're trying to say. They're saying while, right? This right here is recognizing an objection. So squiggly line, what does that mean? They're stating a possible objection to something they're about to say, but they say what they want to say anyway. That's the definition, more or less, of a discount. So you definitely have to cross a line through while. In this case, while is functioning as a discount indicator. Remember discounting from one of the argument modules. But, and I'm sorry if this was a little bit high. This video is already 21 minutes, so I'm not going to start over. If you couldn't see what I was doing, I apologize. But I'm going to just let you stop the video, pause it, and mark this up. So again, I apologize if you couldn't see it. Sometimes I do lose track. But since I'm already at the 22-minute mark, I don't want to start the video over. All right, so a mistake that some students make is they cross out only the discount indicator. Make sure you cross out the entire discount. It's not, I respect your freedom to choose for yourself, you too have a duty to wear a mask. What you've done now is you've created a comma splice. So when you're marking up the arguments, do not create sentence fragments, do not create run-on sentences, do not create comma splices. When you see a word that is actually functioning as a discount indicator, you have to take out the actual discount. This just says in this context that a discount is coming. Keep in mind, warning, the word while does not always tell you a discount is about to come. So be careful with that. Sometimes it functions more as an and. But in this case, we are seeing while function as a discount indicator. We got to take out the objection that the speaker or the writer of the argument is presenting. And then here's really where the final conclusion is. It's okay if you have FC over here because it was the beginning of the bracket. I could have just put an opening bracket here. And if I did do that, then I would have had 5 and FC here, right? Because maybe I recognized that this was a discount, and so I just decided to leave it out in my bracketing. So as you can see, there's a little room for variability when it comes to bracketing and numbering. As long as you're not creating, again, sentence fragments, not creating weirdness or destroying perfectly good statements. All right, so now, next we are going to what? Reformat and employ uniform language. I encourage you to do that on your own and then check your work against mine. Okay, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start with premise 1. According to leading researchers of infectious diseases. Now notice that some of you might be saying, wait a minute, are people who study infectious diseases and virologists really the same people? Aren't these people focused on something else? Isn't this statement kind of irrelevant or wrong? It's clear that this person is using this, so maybe they don't know that maybe they should use the word virologist, but we're not going to worry about that right now because we're not actually evaluating the argument. They're using the word infectious diseases basically to talk about people who have studied mask and COVID-19. They might have the wrong word here, but we're being charitable and saying, okay, they're talking about scientists who have looked at masks in COVID-19. Okay, so according to leading researchers, see, there's a mistake I caught, of infectious diseases, masks help to slow down COVID-19. Here it says, okay, yes, so slow down. We're going to say COVID-19 because, again, that is the technical name for the virus, COVID-19. All right, so is that premise? So notice that statement 1 happens to be premise 1, but that's just a coincidence. Same thing with premise 2. Oh, yeah, okay. So, of course, we're not going to have this down here because it's just premise 1 repeated in different words. Premise 2 is each individual within a given society has a duty to protect the public's health. Okay. Now, what else do we have? So, oh, did you guys, I forgot to tell you what you should do right now because I'm giving you a chance to practice using these tools, right? Is go and review your notes about reformatting, right? So you have some notes that are somewhere in what you wrote down in terms of how do you reformat an argument. Did you review those notes already? So if you haven't done so, review your notes on reformatting arguments. What goes first? Oh, so yeah, this is going to be a little bit of a difference, by the way. So notice how we are reformatting. Okay, so up here, put pay attention to reformatting, this reformatting in this complex argument. And guys, always look at this example. Even if you think you have a simple argument, if you look at this example, you might realize you have a complex argument. Always use the examples that I've given you, in addition to the rules and the notes and all that other stuff. So it just so happens that these two premises are being used to directly support this statement here, this subconclusion right here, statement 4. But we don't number conclusions, even if there is more than one conclusion. That is so important to remember. And so if you give me a second, I'm going to look for something real quick. Let's see, that's page 5, excuse me. While I look for this, I don't want to put the video on pause because if I do, that kind of messes up things. I'm actually realizing we need to add something to our notes. Employing uniform language and reformatting. Okay, so here, this is page 4 of our notes. I need to add something. Special iteration for complex arguments. Okay, so generally, whether you have a simple argument or a complex argument, you still present each logically relevant statement in a list-like format. Each statement still gets its own place in the list. You still label the premises with a P and renumber them. Oh, so here I have renumbered. I should just have renumbered them. Okay, so in a complex argument, you're going to always have at least one premise. So this rule still applies, okay? So see above note on premises. Okay. Now, it says you should label C in a simple argument, right? And start all and only with premises in the list and end with the conclusion. Okay. Here we say that we said that conclusions are not numbered, right? The premises are numbered, but the conclusions are not. That is still the case even in a complex argument. Okay. So we're going to you still don't number anything that is a conclusion. If you did not save space here on page 4 of your notes for the reformatting stuff, then you need to somehow find a room for a note in here or in the comment box in the submission link. In the comment box, you can tell me where these notes are so that I can find them. Otherwise, you may not get full credit. So even when you're working with a complex argument, so we know in a complex argument, we're going to have two statements that function as a conclusion, right? You still don't number anything that is a conclusion. So sometimes students will start to do that in the middle to the end of the semester. They'll think, oh, well, there's more than one conclusion, so I have to number them. No, you still don't number anything that is a conclusion. Even if you have two subconclusions, even if there's just one subconclusion and a final conclusion, you're still not numbering any conclusions. Another thing to realize is that you still start with a premise, okay? There's a caveat to this, okay? So the first thing I will see in a complex argument when you reformat it should be a premise. No SC or FC should start the list. So when you're reformatting a complex argument, I should never see you start with a subconclusion or a final conclusion. You will still start with at least one premise, okay? In a complex argument, you will always end the list with the final conclusion, or with N. And of course, remember when I put something in quotation marks, it means I'm not using it, I'm mentioning it. So here I'm mentioning the label FC. I'm not using the label right now. So you will always end, and this should say with an FC in a complex argument, right? It's really important to take accurate, precise notes. You will always end with a final conclusion, okay? So that said, when you have premises that directly support a subconclusion, you should put those premises directly above that subconclusion. And that's what I'm going to show you here. And you might want to pause the video, rewind it, and maybe put it here as a kind of exclamation mark. Okay, so let me show you what I'm talking about. Here in this argument, S1 and S2 directly support S4. So that's the way I'm going to present the argument. Premise 1 and premise 2 work together to support what? I should say S1 and S2, which turn out to be P1 and P2 by coincidence, are used in direct support of statement 4, a subconclusion, right? Or right now we'll just say conclusion, right? Because statement 4 is functioning as a conclusion relative to these two statements. The conclusion being what? Did I mess up here? Yes, no, I haven't. Okay, I'm good. Each individual in society. Now notice I have in society, and this says within a given society. This could be more general. So this is about any society. It's like a general moral principle. You learn more about this. This is saying in any society. So then we could say each individual in society does have a duty to wear a mask. Maybe they're talking about American or U.S. society. We don't know. But I think that the way this is, since this is not, say, in U.S. society or anything like that, there's no contextual information for us to think that they're talking about one country versus another in its society, we're going to make the language uniform. So in each individual not in, but we're going to use uniform language right here, right? So remember when we're reformatting, we use uniform language, keeping the context in mind. Each individual within a given society has a duty to wear a mask. Some of you might be saying, hey, isn't this merely repeating this? No, this is a general moral principle about a general duty to protect the public's health. This is still a general moral principle, but it's more specific. In other words, a mask. It's about a mask and a duty to wear a mask specifically. So this is a duty that is related to a more general duty. All right, so we've got statement 1 and 2 given in direct support of statement 4, which turns out to be a conclusion. So we could call this step 1 in the argument. This is the actual flow of this argument, but that's just a coincidence. Now, what happens is the person who's presenting the argument then uses what? Statement 4, which we noted earlier, right? They then use this statement as a premise, okay? They join this statement. Do they join it with another premise? Nope. They go straight to a final conclusion, okay? So this is a little bit different from the other complex argument. They don't add a premise. They just say, hey man, from statement 4, I think statement 5 follows. So then we have, in this example, an illustration where you could go directly from a conclusion, right, to another conclusion. So if statement 4 is a conclusion, I shouldn't say first. If statement 4 is a conclusion at some point and is at a conclusion, right, at some point, but now it's going to be used to support statement 5, right, then we know that we need to label this as what? It's first a conclusion relative to 1 and 2 here in the reformatted version, but then it's used to support statement 5, or what is going to be the final conclusion here, so we have to label it SC, because it is used to support the final conclusion, which is what? You two have a duty to wear a mask. Again, I am not contradicting an earlier lesson. We are not saying that a conclusion is being given in support of a final conclusion. You have to remember the definition for subconclusion. You have to remember how this functions in the ordinary argument. You have to remember that this statement first functions as a conclusion relevant to this, and that when we say something's a conclusion, not only is it conclusion at some point of the argument, but it's also a premise. So this becomes a premise when this is being said to follow directly from this. Right, so let me go back up here. So this is, right, first a conclusion, but then it's used to, on the basis of establishing this, it is said that this follows directly from this, meaning that this is also functioning as a premise. Subconclusion means that statement is both a what? A conclusion and a premise. Okay, so then basically you have step 2 right here. So I'm looking over it to see if I want to change anything. According to leading researchers of infectious diseases, masks help to slow down COVID-19. Each individual within a given society has a duty to protect the public's health. So it's concluded on that, based on these two things, that each individual within a given society has a duty to wear a mask. And then it's taken to follow that you too have a duty to wear a mask. So these two statements indirectly support this statement. These two statements directly support this. So let's write a rule. Let's write something really important here. Premises that directly support a subconclusion should be listed directly above said subconclusion. Premises that directly support the final conclusion and have no subconclusions should be listed directly above said final conclusion. Okay, this turns out to be the case here. Okay, so there's an example here. So example is above. Okay, an example of this example. See page 1 of this document. Okay. Whew. All right, so this is the longest lesson of the semester. I promise there'll be no other lessons that are quite this long, but it's a complex argument. It takes more intellectual perseverance. It takes more deliberately sustained focus and effort. And some of you might be thinking, oh, this is too long. Why do I have to follow this? Well, because you might need this. I have to make sure that everyone has what they need for future graded assignments. It wouldn't be right for me to say, okay, this is a complex argument, here are some definitions, and then expect you to apply it for a grade. I have to show you, apply, and iterate, and elaborate. That said, we're almost done with this example. And for this reason, that's why I focus only on complex arguments in terms of a lesson for this week's lessons. But also, I don't teach you any new concepts. When I teach complex arguments, I don't teach anything else. Okay, so now let's go ahead and do the argument diagram, and the argument pattern. I'm going to start with the argument pattern. I think I've been starting with the argument diagram. Okay, so the argument pattern is, remember, so you should go and review your notes. Go and review your notes for argument pattern now. And then come back and give it a try. Remember, it's good to make mistakes. Michael Jordan says that he grows, he's successful, he excels because he has failed. All right, but of course, failed not because he doesn't try, but because he's failed and tried and he learns from his mistakes. So the argument pattern here, assuming that you really did try and you looked at your notes, is what? Premise, and then sub-conclusion, and then final conclusion. Okay? So you should know why I have only one premise and why I have dashes and not arrows. You should know that by now. What about the argument diagram? We have S1. Go and look at your notes for argument diagrams. Okay. So you have S1, and then try this before following me so you can get good at this. A premise works together with S2, another premise. They are both used to support S4, a sub-conclusion. Okay, it's a conclusion first, right? But then that conclusion is joined to, it's not joined with anything in this argument. Rather, it is inferred directly that S5 follows a final conclusion. So here you have step 1, and then here you have, it's like they're proceeding in steps in their argument. Okay? So you might want to compare that with, the other example, right? So you can compare this argument with this one, compare that argument diagram, right, with this argument diagram. Sometimes people think that diagrams from one example should be reflected in their own argument, and that's just not the case, right? Look at this pattern in this example and the pattern in this example. This one has an extra P. All right, like I said, you should know by now why there's only one P here, even though there's two P's consecutively here. All right, so this concludes this extensive lesson on complex argument. We have one more, and that is going to be this one. Now, what I've decided to do is, for complex argument 3, we are going to work through this one. This one, I want you to write this. I want you to write for a grade. I will be looking to see that you do this. Put C video demonstration. So write this for a grade on how to mark up and reformat an argument online. Okay, so where will this video be? In a different task folder. Now, notice that this one starts with, I have come to the conclusion. Remember that when you were doing the week 2 assignments, I told you to start with the conclusion. Therefore, if you do have a complex argument, you're going to have, what you should have is your final conclusion first, if you did everything correctly. It's really important to follow this video in the next task where I show you how to mark up and reformat an argument online, because it's going to be so directly helpful to so many of you who have a complex argument and thus have a final conclusion as the first statement in said argument.